They found him at daybreak, standing on a high crag of black rock overlooking the shiplocked harbor of Storm's End. Salt-laced winds whipped his thick black hair across his brow, and behind him the grand fortress stood in solemn defiance of sea and sky. Gendry drew in a breath, tasting brine and the promise of thunder. He had never before felt the weight of so many eyes upon him. A single step backward would place him inside the fortress once more, with all its labyrinthine corridors and the ghosts that haunted them. A single step forward, down off the cliff, would plunge him into the roiling sea and end as lonely as his childhood. Yet he stood unwavering, shoulders set with a blacksmith's strength, forging a path few would have dared. For too long he had been nameless to the world, just a bastard. Hammer in hand, shaping metal, forging swords for men with bigger names, men who commanded armies and changed the fates of kingdoms. He remembered the heat of the forge in King's Landing, that stifling corner of Flea Bottom where he'd grown from a half-starved boy to a broad-shouldered youth. But the quiet claims of blood had led him here, to Storm's End, ancestral seat of House Baratheon, lords of storms and fury. And in the swirling hours of the night just past, all had changed. He turned at the echo of footsteps. Davos Seaworth's face, lined with both pride and concern, emerged from the shadows. The man had guided Gendry since the chaos of King's Landing's aftermath, sometimes offering counsel in words as plain as a sailor's talk, sometimes just standing by him with a fatherly look in his eyes. "You found a moment's peace?" Davos asked, voice hushed as though they stood at the edge of a sacred ceremony. "I," said Gendry. He could not fully describe what he felt, only that his heart pounded at the memory of last night's events, the hush in the great hall when he declared himself Gendry of House Baratheon, the ancient horns of Storm's End trembling with the echo of his name. Men-at-arms, those who had long served House Baratheon, met him with stares haunted by the specter of the bastards who had gone before. But some saw Robert's eyes in his face, recognized the same square jaw, the same powerful arms that once swung a great warhammer at the trident. One by one, they knelt. He still felt that shock, like an anvil blow, that they did so. "We move quickly," Davos said, stepping up beside him. "Already men speak of loyalty to their rightful lord. Word will travel by raven and by whisper. Cersei is gone. The realm is fractured. The boy King Tommen is gone too, dead in despair. Daenerys Targaryen has sailed west, but her power, though vast, may not easily hold every corner of Westeros. If you stand now openly as Baratheon, you must be ready to lead." Gendry swallowed hard. "Who am I to lead?" he asked, though not out of doubt. The question came from a place of humility he could never quite shed. "I was born in a flea-bottom brothel, Davos. I've spent half my life bending steel for other men, forging their swords and mending their armor. Now they call me Lord of Storm's End. Some whisper I could be king. I can barely grasp it." "It's in your blood," Davos said. "The blood you share with Robert Baratheon and with Renly and Stannis, for better or worse. House Baratheon is feared and respected for a reason. And I'll tell you something else, leadership isn't about titles. It's about the choices you make and the people you protect. You've chosen to claim your birthright. Whether you call yourself king or not, men will follow if you do right by them." Behind them, the new morning sun seeped across the ramparts of Storm's End, gilding the age-old stone with a pale gold light. Gendry studied the fortress, broad-walled, ancient, hammered by the storms that had shaped its very name. He remembered stories of how Orys Baratheon, said to be the bastard brother of Aegon the Conqueror, first claimed these lands. Now another bastard-born Baratheon stood in the same place, centuries later. The notion filled him with a quiet sense of destiny. The storms roared outside, but inside he felt the forging flames of something bigger than he had ever allowed himself to dream. "Ser Davos," Gendry said at last, "I want to see the men-at-arms. I want to look them in the eyes. I'm no ghost come to claim a throne. I'm flesh and blood, and I'll stand with them." Davos nodded. "Wise enough. They'll want to see that you're made of something real, not illusions. They've been led astray before, by Renly's charm, by Stannis' determination. Show them your heart and you'll earn theirs." They descended from the high vantage point, moving through the winding corridors of Storm's End where pillars rose like petrified giants, each a silent testament to the house's storied past. Those who passed them in the halls, guards, servants, stable-hands, bowed or curtsied, but their eyes traced Gendry's features in open curiosity. Wordless questions echoed in the hush. Would he be kind? Would he be cruel? Did he have the cunning of Cersei or the piety of Stannis? Did he have the roguish laugh of Robert or the ambition that spurred men to war? They saw that he looked more like a warrior fresh from the forge than a noble lord with his thick arms and calloused palms. Some, seemingly satisfied, gave him genuine smiles. A page in Baratheon livery led them to the training yard where a small host of soldiers waited in formation. Gendry paused at the arched entrance. The yard reminded him of times past, the clank of steel, the grunts of men pushing themselves to mastery of arms. A swirl of memory flashed, Ser Meryn Trant once mocking him for the smith's shoulders, the day Arya Stark had sparred with wooden swords in a courtyard somewhere, the hot sun overhead. So many stray fragments of his old life collided with the present. Now, about 50 men stood in a disciplined half-circle wearing mail and tabards bearing the crown stag. Some sets of armor were old and dented, some new. Their captain, a balding, scarred knight, stepped forward. "My lord," he said, voice echoing, "we stand ready for your command." Gendry's cheeks warmed. He'd been boy, bastard, lad, but rarely my lord. He forced himself to speak, projecting his voice as he'd once seen others do in King's Landing. "I want you all to know," he began, stepping before them, "that I am a Baratheon by blood, yes, but also by choice. I claim this seat not for a fancy crown or to fill my coffers. I claim it because I believe this house should stand for something beyond power. My father," he almost choked on the word, for Robert was a man he had barely known. He won the throne through rebellion, then lost himself in the comfort of it. "I'm not naive. I know what war costs. I know what forging steel means. You must burn away impurities, shape it with hammer blows. And if the metal is flawed, it will break. I want to make sure we are not flawed. I want to stand for the people beneath our walls, for the peasants who till the fields, for the children who sleep uneasy in the storms. I want you to hold me to that." Silence stretched across the yard, broken only by a gull's cry. One soldier pounded his spear but against the ground, a sign of respect. Then another joined him and another until the entire host gave a thunderous response. In that sound, Gendry felt something shift inside him, like a raw piece of iron that, through heat and pressure, was becoming a new shape. He looked from face to face, memorizing them, silently vowing that he would not squander their trust. Davos touched his shoulder. "They're with you, lad," he murmured. "And I am too." But not all men were won so easily. Gendry could sense doubt simmering under the surface. The rumored dragons of Daenerys Targaryen in King's Landing or the lurking presence of Euron Greyjoy's fleet, so many powers vied for control of Westeros. And there were always opportunists who would question whether a bastard had the right to a seat once held by kings. Yet for now in this yard, Gendry felt the first real spark of something he had rarely possessed, belonging. He knew a rebellion was brewing. Not rebellion for the sake of an iron throne that had been cursed by more blood than he cared to count, but a rebellion of identity, House Baratheon reasserting itself in the storms after so much family turmoil. Gendry felt it in the hush of the corridors, in the ravelry where black-winged birds waited to carry word of his ascension, in the deep crypts where statues of old Baratheons watched with cold stone eyes. The sense that Storm's End was awakening to a new master, and that in the turbulent realm the stag would rise again. That afternoon he met with minor lords and knights of the Stormlands. They arrived in small retinues, uncertain of this new claimant. Some recognized hints of Robert's stance in him, or the stubborn set of Stannis' mouth. Others had heard rumor of Gendry's deeds in the war against the dead or his role forging weapons for the men who had faced the White Walkers. A hush fell when he entered the great hall. Candles flickered, revealing worn banners upon the walls, the stags partially faded by time and soot. He took his seat at the dais, though it felt unnatural to sit above men who were older, cunning, and wise in the ways of politics. One by one, they introduced themselves. Lord Errol, an aging man with shaky hands but sharp eyes. Lady Fell, short of stature and big of heart, who had lost 2 sons in the War of the Five Kings. Ser Bryce Caron, his mustache bristling in the candlelight. And others who wore the sigils of minor houses sworn to Storm's End. They came with questions. Would he press a claim on King's Landing? Would he challenge Daenerys Targaryen? Would he bring stability to the Stormlands after the ravages of war and the losses under Stannis' recruitment? He answered plainly. "I'm no dragon," Gendry said, letting his voice cut through the hall. "I'll not burn my enemies alive, nor set cities aflame. If Daenerys Targaryen treats the people of Westeros with justice, I've no quarrel with her. But if she rules with fear, I will not kneel. House Baratheon has always guarded the Stormlands. We will protect our own. We will not bow to tyrants, nor suffer an unjust king or queen to remain unchallenged." A silence followed, filled by the crackling of fire in the hearth. The lords and ladies exchanged looks. Some frowned in thought, others nodded in cautious agreement. Davos Seaworth stood behind Gendry's chair, hand resting on the pommel of a sword he rarely drew. Gendry continued, "If you would have me as your lord, know that I expect loyalty. But I also promise justice. We must rebuild our fields, our roads, and our ports. We cannot remain as we were, divided at each other's throats, bleeding our small folk dry. Lord Errol cleared his throat. We have heard of the possibility that you might call banners. That you might claim the Stormlands as an independent domain, as was done in the days of Robert's rebellion. Gendry glanced at Davos. His old friend had counseled him to hold back from rash declarations until he was certain of his allies. Yet something in Gendry's gut told him that half-measures would only breed confusion. He took a moment to gather his thoughts, then rose from his seat. I do not deny it. My father once led a rebellion to free the realm from a mad Targaryen king. Now a Targaryen queen sits in King's Landing. Perhaps she is not her father, but the name alone does not calm all hearts. I say let her prove her worth, or else the Stormlands will do what we must. If it comes to rebellion, you will know it, for I will be at the head, not cowering behind my walls. A ripple of admiration passed across several faces. Lady Fell's eyes gleamed. Lord Gendry Baratheon, you speak boldly. We Stormlanders have grown used to boldness over the years. Stannis was stern, Renly was charming, Robert was unstoppable. Can you be unstoppable? A wry smile tugged at Gendry's lips. Only time will tell, my lady. But if we stand together, we'll weather any storm. They lingered over discourse, hammered out details of supply lines, possible alliances, the need to send envoys to other regions. Gendry listened far more than he spoke, gleaning that the Stormlands were bruised from the wars, farmland scorched, pockets of famine lingering, local lords uneasy. Despite that, there was steel in these people. They craved a leader with the fortitude to hold the Stormlands together and the compassion to heal old wounds. Gendry's resolve grew with each word they shared. By evening, his head swam with politics. Davos coaxed him to the solar for a simpler meal of bread, salt pork, and a skin of decent ale. Gendry ate quietly, gazing into the crackling fire. The flames reminded him of the forge, and in that memory he felt a surprising comfort, as though the brutality of shaping metal was simpler than the complexities of shaping a realm. The next day, they prepared ravens. Gendry wrote carefully, his large fingers clumsy around the quill, not from lack of intelligence but from inexperience with the finery of letters. His words were direct. He announced himself as Gendry Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End, rightful caretaker of the Stormlands. He wrote to the Lords of the Reach, the Vale, and even the North, offering cordial greetings and inquiring about any interest in trade or alliances. He did not claim a crown, not yet, but he made it clear that Storm's End would not bend so easily without cause. When he sealed each letter with the wax imprint of the crown stag, he felt a stirring in his chest. Each seal was a promise. Days passed in a tense lull. Couriers and envoys came and went, carrying news of small skirmishes in parts of Westeros. Daenerys Targaryen's forces were mostly in King's Landing, attempting to restore order to the shattered capital. Lannisters remained in Casterly Rock, though their power was much diminished. The Tyrells were gone, replaced by new stewards in Highgarden. The North was in flux under Sansa Stark's leadership. It seemed every corner of the realm was reshaping itself, uncertain which alliances to forge. And in the Stormlands, Gendry waited, forging his own path with the caution Davos advised. But rumors were a hydra. One day, an unsettled hush fell over the great courtyard as a visitor arrived from King's Landing under a flag of truce. Gendry stood at the top of the steps, flanked by 2 guards in Baratheon livery. He watched as a tall man dismounted, wearing black and red leathers, the sigil of House Targaryen on his cloak. The visitor's face was serious, half hidden by a trimmed beard. I come from Queen Daenerys Targaryen, the man announced formally. My name is Ser Jorah Mormont. Gendry inclined his head. He knew the name. Jorah Mormont had served the Targaryen queen for years, was rumored to be one of her most loyal advisors. Welcome to Storm's End, Gendry said, aware that 100 pairs of eyes watched this exchange. What words does the Dragon Queen send? Mormont surveyed the courtyard, measuring the mood of the men around him. He spoke with a courteous calm. Her Grace knows of your claim to Storm's End. She has no quarrel with a loyal vassal if that is your choice. She asks for your fealty so that the realms of men might remain united. Should you bend the knee, you shall remain Lord of Storm's End, and the Stormlands shall prosper under the protection of the Iron Throne. A murmur passed among the gathered soldiers. Davos shifted behind Gendry, his expression guarded. Gendry breathed slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. Ser Jorah, if your queen truly wishes to unite the realm in peace, then we have no quarrel. But I cannot promise fealty to someone I hardly know. Let Queen Daenerys prove she will protect these lands as fiercely as I will. Let her ensure the small folk of the Stormlands will not be taxed into starvation or used as fodder for war. If she can guarantee these things, then I will consider her cause. Mormont's gaze flickered. Her Grace's patience is not endless. Already she has stabilized King's Landing, outlawing the worst abuses of the past. She ensures bread rations for the poor. She listens to her people. Perhaps you might travel to the capital, see for yourself the good she does. Gendry's jaw tightened at the memory of King's Landing. The stench of the gutters, the corruption. The forges that hammered weapons while orphans went hungry. Perhaps, he said after a long pause. But I will not go as a meek supplicant. I will go as a lord among equals, to speak openly with your queen. Mormont inclined his head. As you will. I am but her messenger. Later, in the privacy of the war room, Gendry paced. She wants me kneeling, Davos, he muttered. They all do. They see the Stormlands as part of some grand puzzle. This queen wants to gather all the pieces under her throne. Davos held up a hand in a calming gesture. Remember, lad, you don't know her fully. Daenerys Targaryen's done some good. She's freed slaves across the narrow sea, they say. She might not be her father's daughter in madness. That doesn't mean you have to kneel. But think carefully before you raise the black stag banner of rebellion. War is easy to start, hard to end. Gendry nodded slowly. He felt again that swirl of responsibility, the weight of thousands of lives perched on the edge of his decisions. If I must lead men into war, I'll do it. But not for pride. Only for justice. Over the next weeks, Storm's End began to hum with renewed life. Gendry oversaw repairs to the fortress's outer walls. Craftsmen and blacksmiths from the Stormlands came to the castle, hoping to join the new lord's retinue. Gendry spent hours speaking with them, forging a sense of camaraderie through shared labor. He even returned to the forge himself, surprising many when he stripped off his doublet, bearing corded arms, and helped shape iron bars into new gates and arrowheads. Soldiers paused in wonder, unaccustomed to seeing a lord so at ease with the heat of the anvil. But word spread, this Gendry Baratheon was not idle. He was a man of sweat and calluses, a man who shared the toils of his people. In the evenings, minstrels sang of old glories, of Robert's rebellion, of the storm-lashed keep that never fell. Gendry listened with a guarded heart, reminded of how quickly men's songs could distort truth. He recalled that Robert, for all his champion's aura, had turned lazy and neglectful once the throne was his. Gendry vowed not to repeat that mistake. Yet storms brew quickly in the Stormlands, and so too did trouble brew in the realm. Rumors reached them that a faction of Lannister loyalists was gathering arms in the Crownlands, that Euron Greyjoy still prowled the seas. Whispers spoke of hidden pockets of dissent against Daenerys, claiming she was an invader from Essos. The lords of the Stormlands began to grumble that they needed a firm stance, either align themselves fully with the Iron Throne or declare independence as the North once did. Gendry became the focal point of these debates. He felt torn, uncertain whether to trust a Targaryen who had once threatened to break the wheel but might be forging a new one in its place. Then an ill omen arrived, a battered messenger with a black eye and a twisted arm, bearing news of a raid on harvest wagons near the Stormlands borders. The messenger claimed the raiders wore no heraldry but carried the speech of outlaws, bandits who threatened to return if the local villages dared to withhold food from the new Rifle King. The details were murky, but the threat was real enough. Gendry reacted swiftly, organizing a patrol to secure the roads and dispatching riders to learn more. The Stormlands, still recovering from war, could ill afford roving packs of criminals. A fortnight later, the missing truth revealed itself in a flurry of violence. While Gendry was out inspecting farmland near Parchments, a small hamlet under Storm's End's protection, a group of brigands descended under cover of darkness. The local farmers had barely time to scream before flames rose, igniting thatch roofs. Women and children fled into the night. Gendry spurred his horse, hammer in hand. He'd taken to carrying it instead of a sword, a nod to his father's weapon of choice and his own blacksmith roots. The hammered steel head was etched with a stag's head sigil. His small retinue charged across the fields, the moonlight revealing columns of smoke. Gendry saw silhouettes darting between the burning houses. As he thundered toward them, the brigands turned to face him. Fury welled inside Gendry, a righteous anger on behalf of the defenseless. He leaped from his horse, the warhammer swinging in a brutal arc that crushed the first outlaw's shield. The man stumbled back with a cry. Gendry pressed on, every muscle honed from years at the forge. A second outlaw slashed at him with a scimitar, but Gendry's parry knocked the blade aside. He brought his hammer down with a force that dented the man's breastplate and ended the fight before it began. All around him, his men clashed with the raiders. Muffled screams, sparks flying, the reek of burning straw. Gendry realized these weren't simple bandits, they moved with discipline as though led by someone who'd trained them. The truth struck him, these men might be mercenaries or soldiers disguised as outlaws, sowing chaos in his domain. He gritted his teeth, determined to send them packing. A voice rang out above the din, for the true Baratheon king. Gendry froze. Had one of the brigands just invoked his name? But no, the accent was off, a sharp bark. Another voice joined, for Edric Storm. The name whirled in Gendry's ears. Edric Storm, Robert Baratheon's other acknowledged bastard, once spirited away by Davos to save him from Melisandre's designs. Gendry hadn't seen Edric in years. Now these raiders claimed to fight for him? Confusion tangled with Gendry's anger. Could Edric Storm be behind this? The question alone soured his stomach. Then a tall figure in mismatched armor charged him, sword raised high. He wore a cloth mask over his face, but Gendry caught sight of wild eyes. They clashed, the sword scraping across the steel edge of Gendry's hammer. Sparks rained. The bandit snarled, Edric is the rightful heir, bastard. I'm no lesser bastard than he, Gendry roared back, heart-pounding. We're both Robert's get. He forced the man's sword aside, stepping in with a punishing blow of the hammer that slammed against the brigand's side. The man collapsed with a groan, coughing blood. The skirmish ended as quickly as it began, the outlaws either dead or retreating into the night, leaving behind wrecked homes and a swirl of confusion. Gendry's men doused the flames, pulling villagers to safety. Afterwards, by torchlight, Gendry stood among the survivors, tense, covered in soot, his breath coming in hard rasps. A little girl clung to his leg, eyes wide with terror. Gendry stroked her hair, murmuring reassurances. He felt sick. War had never looked so real and immediate. He was no stranger to violence, but to see farmers' homes in ashes, to see children trembling, that was a new blow. Davos arrived, panting, having ridden hard from the next village over. We've driven them off, he said in a ragged voice. But I heard them cry the name Edric Storm? Gendry nodded grimly. Yes. They claimed to fight for another Baratheon bastard. Someone stirring them up. Maybe Edric himself, or maybe someone using his name. Davos's face was etched with concern. He was a decent boy. I helped him escape Dragonstone once. Hard to imagine him leading brigands. But these are troubled times and men can be twisted by ambition. He surveyed the wreckage, farmers kneeling in the mud, tears streaking their cheeks, the burnt carcass of a barn, charred livestock. Gendry clenched his fists. We'll track them. We'll see who leads them. This cannot stand. The news of the attack galvanized the Stormlanders. Whispers turned to outcry, a pretender was rallying under the name of Edric Storm, challenging Gendry's hold on Storm's End. Weary from a lifetime of strife, the Stormlands teetered on the edge of civil war within its own borders. Some recalled Edric as a fair-haired youth with a noble bearing, taken away in secrecy. Others saw Gendry as the physically powerful but untested blacksmith's son. Rumors swirled, one bastard Baratheon against another. The realm did not need another Baratheon feud, yet here they were. Gendry dispatched scouts. He spent sleepless nights pacing ramparts, scanning the horizon for signs of further raids. He wrote to any who might know Edric Storm's whereabouts. Anxiety gnawed at him. If Edric was truly behind these acts, Gendry might be forced to fight a man who shared his blood. The thought sickened him. Meanwhile, pleas for help arrived from small folk who feared additional attacks. Gendry sent men to guard villages, posted watchmen on every major road, and set up supply lines to feed those who lost their crops. Each measure won him admiration from the common folk, but the threat loomed. Storm's End braced itself, as it always did, for the next thunderous assault. Then came a raven from across the sea. It carried grim tidings. Euron Greyjoy's longships had been sighted in the narrow sea. The would-be king of the Iron Islands was rumored to be forging alliances with discontented lords, bartering gold and promises of power. Could Euron be involved, supporting Edric Storm to sow further chaos in the Stormlands? Gendry felt the weight of possibilities pressing down on him like an iron vice. Amid this turmoil, he found fleeting solace in the forge. Late at night, when the castle slumbered, he'd return to the smithy, stoke the coals, and hammer out the frustration in his chest. Sparks danced in the darkness, the rhythm of metal on metal a lullaby to his feverish mind. Davos found him there sometimes, eyes rimmed with concern, but also a quiet pride in how Gendry faced these burdens. One night, as the moon hung heavy, a shadow flickered at the smithy's entrance. Gendry looked up, his hammer paused mid-swing, to see the slight figure of Arya Stark. She emerged from the darkness as if it were her own domain, her gray eyes unreadable. Arya, he breathed, lowering his hammer gently onto the anvil. Memories washed over him, the girl he'd traveled with who had stolen his heart in ways he struggled to define. He had not seen her in many moons. The last he'd heard, she was in the north, a lady of Winterfell and a warrior in her own right. "Gendry," she said quietly, stepping closer. Her gaze flickered around the forge, taking in the half-finished swords, the tools. "I heard rumors you'd claim Storm's End." He nodded. The tension of the night weighed on him, the pressure of all that had transpired. Her presence reminded him of simpler times, even if those times had been marked by danger. "It's complicated," he said, raking a hand through his hair. "What brings you here?" Her lips curved in a faint smile. "I came because I heard you might need friends. The North is its own realm now, but Sansa rules more with caution than conquest. I had leave to travel, and I chose to see an old friend." They stared at each other in the dim glow of the forge. So many unspoken emotions flared between them. At last, Gendry exhaled. "I'm glad you're here. This place feels less lonely now." Arya stepped closer, placing a hand on his. The warmth of her touch cut through the clang of battle that had been echoing in his mind. "I'm no courtly lady," she said. "You know that." "I know," he replied, his voice low, a slight smile on his lips. "And I've never wanted a courtly lady." She placed a finger to his mouth, silencing him. In the hush, they stood, hearts pounding, recalling the journey that had led them both to this moment. Then she withdrew, returning her hand to her side. "I'll help you if I can," she said. "I may not swear fealty, but I'll stand beside you while I'm here." He nodded, gratitude washing over him. He had no illusions that Arya would remain forever. She was a wanderer, a wolf that roamed. But in these troubled times, a single ally with her skill and bravery could mean the difference between survival and ruin. In the days that followed, Arya's presence brought a new sense of assurance to Gendry's cause. She scouted under cover of night, gleaning rumors of the outlaw bands. She questioned frightened villagers with a gentle approach that belied her fierce reputation. She taught Gendry's guards new tricks of swordplay and stealth. And she was there when, at last, intelligence arrived. Edric Storm himself had been sighted in the Stormlands, gathering men under a black banner with a golden stag, proclaiming himself the true Baratheon heir. The day Gendry read that report, the room spun slightly. This was no rumor or ruse. Edric was here, leading men who committed violence in his name. He convened a council of his closest advisors, Davos, Arya, Lady Fell, and a few trusted knights. "We have to confront him," Gendry said, his hammer resting against the table like a silent declaration. "We can't let him ravage villages in some misguided claim." Lady Fell frowned. "Could we parley first? Perhaps reason with him?" Arya's stare was cold. "Reason with a traitor who burns houses? Seems a waste of breath. But if you must, Gendry, try. Just don't expect him to show mercy. Men who stoop to terror rarely do." Davos nodded. "Still, a parley might show the realm we tried to avoid bloodshed. If Edric truly wants the Stormlands, you must meet him as an equal. Offer him a chance to stand down. If he refuses, the blame for war lies at his feet, not yours." Gendry struggled with a tangle of emotions. Edric was family, albeit a half-brother he barely knew. Could he truly stand across a battlefield from him, weapons raised? The thought was as bitter as the salt air. But letting Edric continue would only invite more atrocities. "We'll send a raven asking for a meeting," Gendry decided. "But I'll not yield Storm's End to a man who burns the innocent." They arranged a meeting place, an old ring fort near the Weeping Glen, about a day's ride from Storm's End. Neutral ground, or as close to it as could be managed. Gendry insisted on going personally, taking Davos, Arya, and a small guard. They traveled in grim silence, thunderheads gathering on the horizon as if to echo the tension in Gendry's soul. When they arrived at the ring fort, a circle of ancient stones standing in tall grass, they found Edric's men already waiting. There were about 24 of them, armed with swords and spears. At their center stood a young man, perhaps Gendry's age or a bit younger, with eyes as blue as summer skies and hair the color of chestnuts. He wore no crown, but he bore himself with an air of command. Gendry dismounted and stepped forward, the hammer slung across his back. Arya and Davos fell in beside him, watchful. The two bastards of Robert Baratheon faced each other. They had met once in passing on Dragonstone, but that was years ago. Recognition flickered in Edric's eyes. "Gendry," he said, his tone guarded. "You look like him, you know? Our father." Gendry bristled, trying not to let Edric's nerve unbalance him. "You've brought chaos to the Stormlands, Edric. Why? If you want the seat, you should have come to me in peace." "Peace?" Edric's expression soured. "Would you have given me half our father's legacy? Storm's End? Or would you have told me to go back to the shadows? I've been hidden away my whole life, shuffled around to keep me safe from those who wanted my blood. I'm done hiding. Robert was my father first." Gendry's jaw clenched. He was your father, but not only yours. We share that blood. But that doesn't grant you the right to burn villages. A flicker of guilt, or perhaps frustration, crossed Edric's face. I never ordered them to burn anything. My men got out of hand. This is war, Gendry. Things happen. That's not good enough, Gendry said, anger rising. Do you think the small folk care about which bastard can claim Robert's name? They only care that you attacked them, destroyed their homes. Edric's eyes hardened. And what if I say you hold Storm's End by false right? I've known learned men who said a king's firstborn, bastard or not, is the rightful heir. And I was acknowledged by Stannis, taught by Maester Crescent himself. I'm the legitimate bastard, if that even makes sense. But more importantly, I will not be overshadowed again. Davos cleared his throat. This talk of legitimacy is foolish. Both of you were born on the wrong side of the sheets. The question is who can lead the Stormlands better. Gendry is here in the seat working to rebuild. What have you offered but banditry? Edric's face reddened. Call me a bandit again, old man, and see how quickly steel answers. His men bristled, shifting on their feet. Arya's hand hovered near the hilt of her dagger, her eyes ice-cold. Gendry forced himself to remain calm. I didn't come here to trade insults. We share blood. Edric, maybe we could share power. Storm's End is big enough for us both. Come with me, stand by my side. I'll name you heir if I never have children of my own. He felt the words leave his mouth, unsure if he truly wanted them. But the prospect of more slaughter weighed heavier on his conscience. Edric's laugh was bitter. Share? As though I'm some lesser cousin? No, Gendry. I want you gone. Your presence in the Stormlands undermines my claim. I came to parley only because I hoped you might recognize my right. But you still cling to your seat. Gendry shook his head. This is madness. Edric's reply came quietly, but with lethal resolution. Then I suppose we have nothing left to say. Soon enough, I'll knock on the gates of Storm's End, and you'll learn the fury of a true Baratheon. With that, Edric turned on his heel. His men followed, leaving Gendry standing among the ancient stones, the wind tossing his hair like a tempest. Arya exhaled, tension easing from her shoulders only slightly. Davos let out a slow breath. They had hoped for a peaceful resolution, but the lines were drawn. They rode back to Storm's End under a sky dark with storm clouds, lightning flickering on the horizon. A storm inside Gendry's chest raged as well. This was family, twisted by ambition, determined to rip the Stormlands apart in some misguided quest for legitimacy. Gendry felt the weight of the fortress pressing down on him. Would the storms of war never end? When they reached the safety of the castle gates, a cold rain began to fall, turning the courtyards to slick stone. Gendry paused in the entryway, scanning the battlements where guards lit torches against the gloom. He clenched his fists around the reins of his horse. If Edric came in force, the Stormlands would be drenched in blood again. He glanced at Davos, who read his eyes with silent sympathy. Then Arya spoke softly, her voice cutting through the patter of rain. You can't run from this, Gendry. If he won't stand down, you'll have to stop him. The only question is how to do it without losing what makes you who you are. Gendry nodded, swallowing a bitter taste in his throat. He had never asked to lead a rebellion, to stand against another man with Baratheon blood. But fate had placed him here, in the Seat of Storms. He recalled the feel of hot metal beneath his hammer, shaping it into something useful. Perhaps war was no different. He would have to endure the fire and strike until the realm was reforged, no matter how painful the blows. And as thunder rolled in the distance, Gendry promised himself that, come what may, he would fight to protect the people who had placed their faith in him. They met the storm head-on. After the failed parley, Gendry wasted no time fortifying the castle and the lands around Storm's End. Patrols rode day and night to intercept Edric's raiders before they could do further harm. At first, only a handful of skirmishes flared along the inland roads, scattered engagements that left both sides tasting blood. Farmers discovered battered corpses under hedgerows at dawn, some wearing the stag sigil, others wearing none, and the fear in the villages grew. Gendry took what comfort he could in the knowledge that his men protected more innocents than they lost, but each new report pricked his conscience all the same. He had not wanted this war. He was forging a cause from necessity, but every hammer stroke carried the weight of guilt. Arya stalked the corridors of Storm's End by night, restless and grim. She had her own private regrets about how quickly negotiations had turned sour. But Edric's dismissal of any shared loyalty lit a spark of anger deep in her chest. Sometimes Gendry caught her gazing at the moonlit sea with an expression that spoke of old pains she rarely voiced. Late one evening, he found her on the battlements. Wind off the water tangled her hair, her cloak clung tight to her lean frame. She spoke without turning to look at him. "I hate this. Good men die on each side, and what do we gain but more graves?" He leaned against a crenellation and crossed his arms, gazing at her profile in the moonlight. If Edric would have stood down, we wouldn't have to bury anyone. A pause lingered. "You could leave, you know. Go north, away from all this. I'd understand." She turned, eyes fierce. "I won't abandon you. I may not serve you as a bannerman would, but you're my friend. And these people, someone must fight for them, or men like Edric will step on their necks in pursuit of a throne." He nodded, feeling an odd warmth in his chest. She was a blade, honed by the tragedies of her past, an edge that cut through the gloom. He wondered if she realized how much her presence steadied him. "Then we stand together," he said quietly. The next day, scouts returned with clearer news of Edric's whereabouts. He had made a temporary camp in the southwestern Stormlands, on land once belonging to a lesser branch of House Errol. The estate's manor was in ruins, but it was well positioned between forest and hills, with a small river running nearby. A strong defensive spot for a growing army of malcontents and hedge knights. Gendry held council, and the debate raged about whether to strike first or wait for Edric's next move. Lady Fell was the first to counsel an offensive. She argued that if they allowed Edric to consolidate, it would force a larger and more brutal engagement. Better to break him while his ranks were scattered. Some of the knights agreed. They were tired of feeling as though they simply reacted to raids. But Davos took a more cautious view. "We have no guarantee that Edric's entire force is at that camp," he pointed out. "And if we ride out boldly, we leave Storm's End vulnerable to a feint. Perhaps Edric wants us to come at him, leaving the fortress undermanned." Gendry tapped the table with a thick finger. "Every day we wait, more farmland gets exposed, more villages cower under threat. We can't let him terrorize the realm. If he's truly set on taking Storm's End, that's his endgame. We can't pretend passivity is an option." The council weighed both perspectives. Arya, leaning in a shadowed corner, said little until Gendry turned to her. "Do you have a thought?" She glanced around the table. "Send out small, highly skilled groups to harass him. Thin his ranks, demoralize his men. When he's forced to gather THM for protection, then we strike in full. But do it on our terms, where we can control the terrain." It was a strategy of infiltration and ambush, a style more reminiscent of how the North had fought during the War of the Five Kings. Some of the Stormlander knights bristled, preferring open battles with shining armor. But Gendry recognized the wisdom in Arya's suggestion. "We'll do it," he decided. "We'll send out riders, led by someone experienced in stealth. They'll strike at Edric's supply lines, free any forced conscripts, scare away hedge knights who are only there for coin. The moment Edric is weakened, we gather the bulk of our forces and finish this." Thus began a stealth campaign in the southwestern Stormlands. Under the cover of darkness, small teams slipped into enemy territory. Arya led one such group personally, a half-dozen skilled fighters, each carefully chosen for cunning and speed. They avoided main roads, used the thick forest for concealment. More than once, they ambushed Edric's foragers or supply wagons. Though these were minor victories, rumor of ghosts in the trees spread through Edric's camp. Some said the young Wolf Queen's sister haunted the Stormlands, others whispered of devils conjured by the bastard blacksmith lord. It mattered little what names they used as long as fear took root. Arya's group rescued local peasants who'd been coerced into serving as scouts for Edric. A few of the captured men were no older than 14, pressed into a conflict they barely understood. When they saw a lone figure dart out of the darkness with lethal precision, they surrendered without a fight. The rescued peasants often spoke of how Edric seemed desperate to expand his forces quickly. The outlaws operating under him had strict orders to seize arms and gather men from every corner. No wonder the southwestern Stormlands trembled. One evening, Arya and her team discovered a hidden camp of about 30 men. They seemed more brigands than soldiers, rough garments, grim expressions, the smell of unwashed bodies. Light from their campfire flickered across a ragged banner, black cloth with a gold stag that had been crudely painted. Arya signaled her group to encircle the clearing. They crept in silently, knives drawn, arrows nocked. She caught snatches of conversation, enough to know these men were intending to raid the nearby hamlet at dawn for food and coin. Arya's blood ran cold, remembering the cowering children she had seen in the aftermath of similar raids. She stepped forward like a phantom, loosening the scarf around her neck. The brigands noticed her only when she stood near the edge of the firelight. One of them, a big man with missing teeth, scrambled to his feet, hand going to the hilt of his sword. "Who in seven hells?" Arya's voice was quiet as a blade sliding from its sheath. "You're done. Lay down your weapons." The men glanced around and realized they were surrounded by archers crouched in the dark brush. The big man snarled, "We don't take orders from a slip of a girl." He lunged for her. Arya was faster. She sidestepped, sweeping her blade across the back of his legs. He dropped with a howl, clutching at torn flesh. Two others leapt to avenge him, but Arya's archers loosed arrows that whistled through the night. The men fell, clutching feathered shafts. The rest of the camp froze. A few younger brigands threw down their swords, terrified. Others looked at each other, uncertain whether to charge or flee. Arya's second-in-command, a Stormlander scout named Vikon, shouted, "Drop your weapons. We have you surrounded." Steadily, the men complied, some cursing under their breath, others shivering in fear. They were disarmed, tied up, and questioned. Those found to have murdered or pillaged faced swift judgment, a justice that in war often came at the edge of a blade. The rest, especially the youngest conscripts, were marched back to Storm's End to stand trial. Arya felt no satisfaction in it. She recalled the words of a wise man once spoken to her, "Death is not the end, sometimes it's the beginning of a worse story." She offered quick ends to those who deserved it but spared those she could. That was more mercy than many in this region might have shown. Within weeks, Edric's outrages faltered. Forced to pull his men closer so they wouldn't be picked off piecemeal, he consolidated his position around the ruined manor at Glenmore. Fear ate away at his ranks. Some hedge knights found reasons to desert, slipping away into the night. Rumors drifted that Edric had grown paranoid, seeing enemies in every shadow. Gendry's scouts reported glimpses of him pacing near the half-collapsed tower, an anxious figure with fury smoldering in his eyes. Yet even cornered, Edric's force was still substantial. By the time Gendry determined the moment was right to strike, Edric had hundreds of men behind crude barricades with vantage points overlooking the approaches to Glenmore. Lady Fell assembled a war council in Storm's End's Great Hall to plan the final confrontation. Gendry sat at the long table, warhammer resting across his lap, listening as knights and lords debated how best to assault the position. Some favored a direct approach, using the bulk of their forces to smash the barricades and overrun the camp. Others proposed a multi-pronged attack from the hills and the river. Davos, as usual, cautioned about the potential pitfalls of underestimating Edric's leadership. Gendry turned to Arya, hoping for her insight once more. She studied the rough map laid out with wooden tokens representing troop placements. Attacking head-on across open ground leaves our men vulnerable to archers. But if we only use stealth, we risk dragging this out. Edric might escape to regroup. A combined approach might be best, draw his main strength to one flank with an open challenge, then send a smaller force around to seize the river crossing and cut off any escape. Once Edric realizes he's trapped, he may either surrender or charge. Either way, we'll have the advantage. The plan was agreed upon by the council. Gendry would lead the primary force personally, hammer in hand, wearing the black and gold stag on his breastplate. A smaller detachment of swift riders and infantry would slip through the nearby wood, secure the river crossing, and hold the line against any attempts to flee or circle back. Arya offered to lead that detachment. Gendry hesitated, torn between wanting her at his side and recognizing that she was perfectly suited to command a swift, decisive maneuver. In the end, he consented. Dawn broke gray and cold on the day of the battle. A somber hush fell over the Stormlander camp as men buckled armor, sharpened swords, whispered prayers. The wind carried the tang of wet grass and distant thunder, though no rain fell. Gendry paced among his troops, offering quiet words of encouragement. He felt both fear and determination in their ranks. They bore battered gear, patched leathers, chipped swords, but they had heart. Some recognized him from the forge, and their eyes glowed with something akin to respect. Others saw the square-jawed intensity of Robert Baratheon, the promise of unstoppable force. Gendry could only pray he didn't fail them. They set out just after sunrise. Gendry's main host advanced across gently rolling fields toward Glenmore, banners snapping in the breeze. At the head rode Gendry on a stout warhorse, flanked by knights in battered plate and archers on foot. The Stormlands had seen countless battles, from the days of the first men to Aegon's conquest, and the land war scars that even centuries could not fully erase. The ground beneath Gendry's horse felt heavy with history. Within an hour, the ruin of Glenmore came into view. A stone carcass perched near a lazy, meandering river. Edric's men had erected sharpened stakes along the perimeter. A ragged banner bearing his makeshift sigil fluttered from a broken parapet. Figures moved behind low barricades, presumably archers and crossbowmen lying in wait. Gendry reined in, raising a hand to halt his troops. He could see, in the distance, men scurrying to and fro, preparing for the inevitable clash. Gendry drew in a slow breath and lifted his warhammer skyward, letting sunlight flash against the iron head. He thought of the day his father, Robert, had faced Prince Rhaegar on the Trident. Perhaps Robert had felt the same mix of terror and adrenaline. He bellowed across the field, his voice carrying on the wind, "Edric Storm, I call you out one last time. Surrender and face justice, or meet your end today." A hush draped the battlefield, broken only by the rustle of grass in the breeze. For a moment, Gendry wondered if Edric would appear. But then, a tall figure emerged on the rampart of the half-collapsed tower. His features were distant, but Gendry imagined the scorn in his face. Edric shouted something inaudible too far to make out. Then a trumpet blast rang out from within the ruins and a flight of arrows arced overhead. They whistled as they fell among Gendry's troops. Men shouted in alarm, shields lifted. Some arrows struck home with dull thuds, dropping a few unlucky souls. The battle had begun. Gendry wasted no time. He signaled his archers to return fire, and soon the sky was laced with shafts. Men on both sides ducked behind cover. The Stormlander infantry advanced in a slow, disciplined formation, shields overlapping as they trudged toward the barricades. War cries rang out. The world dissolved into a cacophony of shouting, steel on steel, and the hiss of arrows. Gendry spurred his horse forward. He saw an opening, a gap in the barricades near the manor's crumbled gate. Charging across rutted ground, he led a wedge of mounted knights, the thunder of hooves echoing in his ears. More arrows spat from the ramparts, but many went wide, hammered astray by the swirling wind. When Gendry's wedge hit the barricades, splintered wood exploded around them. He swung his hammer in a wide arc, knocking aside a spearman who had rushed too close. His horse reared, hooves flailing, as infantry behind him poured through the opening. From the left flank, Edric's men rushed to contain the breach. A wave of swords, spears, and curses crashed against Gendry's knights. Blood misted the air. Gendry caught a glimpse of his side, where a crossbow bolt had lodged in his armor's left pauldron. The impact hurt, but he felt no sharp pain of penetration. He roared, hauling the hammer upward to bash aside a helm. A swirl of chaos enveloped him, shouts, screams, the ugly rasp of metal. He could not tell if minutes or hours passed as he hacked and bashed his way deeper into the courtyard. The stench of mud, sweat, and blood filled his nostrils. His foot soldiers followed, surging in behind to secure the foothold. Sporadic fighting erupted all around the ruined manor. Men grappled in the shadows of scorched walls, archers took potshots from behind fallen stones, cavalry circled in the field outside to ward off any flanking maneuvers. Gendry prayed Arya and her detachment had seized the river crossing by now, cutting off escape. If Edric was forced to commit all his men here, the battle might end quickly. Yet Edric's force proved stubborn. They had staked their pride on this rebellion. Surrender was not easily found in them. Gendry's men gained ground yard by yard, pushing through the rubble, but every few steps brought a new clash. Cries of pain echoed off mossy stone. Gendry saw one of his knights, a man who had sworn fealty days earlier, collapse under a barrage of spear thrusts. He let out a growl, swung his hammer overhead, and hammered two of the spearmen to the ground. Adrenaline blazed in his veins. He felt raw and unbreakable, though he knew that was an illusion that could shatter at any moment. A sudden hush settled behind the walls, broken only by panting men and the shuffle of boots over uneven ground. Gendry pressed forward, his hammer's weight sagging in his arms. He stepped into what had once been the manor's great hall, its roof long caved in. A ring of Edric's soldiers stood guard there, forming a defensive circle around their leader. Edric stood at the center, sword in hand, his breath ragged. His eyes flickered with defiance. Gendry's own men spread out around the perimeter, cutting off retreat. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The flickering sunlight cut through jagged holes in the walls. Dust motes danced in the rays, mingling with the swirl of smoke from fires that crackled in the distance. Gendry stared at Edric, remembering the boy he'd briefly encountered years ago, the youth whisked away by Davos to save him from Stannis' Red Priestess. Now here he stood, a defiant man armed for war. Edric lifted his chin. "It seems you've cornered me, brother." Gendry's reply was equally hoarse. "It didn't have to come to this." Edric barked a laugh. "Spare me the false sympathy. You wanted the Stormlands for yourself. You always did." The men around them stirred, tense as coiled springs. Gendry's knuckles whitened on the haft of his hammer. "There's still a chance to end this without more blood. Surrender." A dark flicker crossed Edric's face. "I have nothing left to lose. If I yield, you'll lock me away. I'll be the bastard who tried to unseat Gendry Baratheon. And if I fight, well, I might die, but better that than languish in your shadow." Without another word, he lunged. His men surged forward too, steel flashing in the moted sunlight. Gendry met Edric's blade with the hammer's handle, knocking it aside. Edric twisted gracefully, the sword whistling toward Gendry's shoulder. Gendry narrowly dodged, feeling the blade graze his armor and a flash of heat where it cut through cloth. Pain flared. Around them, men clashed anew, steel clamoring off stone. Gendry focused on Edric alone, blocking out the chaos at the edges of his vision. Hammer against sword, bastard brother against bastard brother. Edric was quick, far more nimble than Gendry, who relied on brute strength. But Gendry had the advantage of his battered plate and the raw power that came from swinging a forge hammer since youth. Edric landed a blow that sliced into Gendry's thigh armor, but it didn't bite deep, leaving only a numbing bruise. Gendry retaliated with a mighty swing that forced Edric to dive aside, stumbling over fallen debris. They circled each other, panting. Gendry felt warm blood trickling down his arm, but he still gripped the hammer. Edric's face shone with sweat, eyes darting for any opening. "Yield," Gendry tried again between ragged breaths. "This is madness." Edric bared his teeth. "No more running. No more hiding." He surged forward, launching a flurry of strikes that forced Gendry back a step. Gendry parried, hammered aside one thrust, then another. Sparks danced where sword edge met steel. Finally, seeing an opening, he swung the hammer upward with all his might. It connected with Edric's sword hand, sending the blade flying from his grip in a shower of blood. Edric gasped, staggering, cradling his shattered fingers. Before Edric could recover, Gendry pressed the hammer's head to the man's chest, holding him at bay. Edric's eyes were wild, but the fight seemed to seep out of him. He dropped to his knees, panting. The remaining ring of Edric's defenders likewise faltered, some surrendering, others cut down. The hall fell silent save for the crackle of distant flame and men groaning in pain. Gendry stared down at Edric. Blood dripped from his own wounds, smearing the hammered stag on his armor. His heart thundered in his ears. This was the moment. He could end Edric's life with a single blow. The rightful Lord of Storm's End punishing a traitor who had burned villages and brought war to the Stormlands. The men around them watched with grim acceptance, many expecting that was how this must end. Yet Gendry's muscles locked. He saw not a nameless foe, but a man who shared his blood, shaped by the same father's legacy and twisted by the same realm's cruelties. He remembered being a boy in Flea Bottom, forging swords for others, never dreaming he might rise to nobility. In Edric, he saw a mirror of the precarious path bastards walked. He wrenched the hammer away, lifting its iron head from Edric's chest. "I won't kill you," he rasped. "You'll stand trial for the crimes you committed, and the realm will judge you. Your men, too. But I won't strike you down like a rabid dog." Edric stared up, confusion warring with anguish in his eyes. His ruined fingers trembled, blood pooling on the dusty floor. For a heartbeat, he seemed poised to spit defiance. Then his shoulders sagged. The last flicker of rebellion went out in him like a snuffed candle. Gendry motioned to his soldiers, who rushed forward to bind Edric's hands and tend to the wounded. Men dragged the survivors to a makeshift holding area. Davos arrived, panting and streaked with blood, relief flooding his face when he saw Gendry alive. Arya appeared moments later, flushed from her successful mission at the river crossing, though her eyes clouded with sorrow at the sight of the fallen. The day was theirs, but the cost was measured in lives scattered like broken steel across the ruins. A subdued hush settled over Glenmore once the battle died. The stink of death lingered, and the moans of the wounded echoed off crumbling walls. Gendry ordered his men to carry out the dead on both sides, to lay them in rows so their identities might be known and their families informed. He directed healers to tend to the wounded, even Edric's, as best they could with limited supplies. Some men cast him uneasy glances, not accustomed to seeing such mercy for traitors. But Gendry insisted. "We do better than they did. We must." At last, as the sky dimmed toward evening, Gendry stood amid the rubble, taking stock of the day. He was weary to the bone. Davos approached, voice quiet. "We've lost good men, but your leadership carried the day. The Stormlands are safer now. Gendry stared at the broken tower, its jagged silhouette cutting the orange sky. Safer, he repeated, voice heavy. But this is still a land battered by war. And Edric's done enough damage that it'll take years to heal. If it ever does. Davos touched his shoulder. You showed restraint, Gendry. Many lords would have butchered Edric on the spot. You gave him a chance at justice, a fair trial. That will matter to those who watch how you rule. Gendry managed a faint nod. I only hope it's enough. The next days were spent securing Edric's camp, rounding up stragglers, and organizing the wounded. Some outlaws tried to flee, but Arya's detachment closed off the roads, bringing them to heel. The price had been high, but Gendry had put an end to the immediate threat. Storm's End received him back with a muted cheer, the gates opening to welcome the victorious but blood-soaked host. The courtyard bustled with healers, messengers, and somber lords who came to congratulate and console. They placed Edric in a secure cell deep within Storm's End, under constant watch. Despite his battered state, he remained stone-faced, answering few questions. Gendry wrestled with the question of sentencing. The law was clear about treason, especially treason that resulted in civilian deaths. Execution was typical. Yet Gendry hesitated. Davos brought up the notion of sending Edric to the wall, but the Night's Watch was in disarray, and the North had grown more isolationist. In the end, Gendry decided to delay the verdict until a proper tribunal could convene, a rare choice in such times, but he wanted no question that justice had been served properly, not vengeance. In the midst of this tension, a raven arrived from King's Landing. Its message was penned in a strong, assured hand. Queen Daenerys Targaryen wished to visit Storm's End personally. She had heard of the rebellion and was concerned for the stability of the Stormlands. Gendry read the note twice, his pulse racing. To have the Dragon Queen arrive at his gates, what would it mean? His lords muttered about whether she came as a potential ally or an overlord demanding submission. Davos reminded Gendry of the courtesy that must be shown to any monarch, especially one who commanded dragons. Arya merely arched an eyebrow, hinting that she might make herself scarce if the Targaryens came, remembering all too well the tensions that existed between House Stark and the Iron Throne. Nevertheless, Gendry replied politely, extending an invitation. He could not refuse her even if he dared. A few weeks later, word reached Storm's End that Daenerys approached by sea with a modest retinue, including her most trusted advisors. Gendry prepared the castle as best he could. Banners were hung, floors scrubbed. He donned his newly forged ceremonial breastplate, hoping he looked more lordly than an overgrown smith. Arya rolled her eyes at the fuss, telling him she preferred his simpler garb, but Gendry insisted it was necessary for diplomacy. At last, the day arrived. Gulls wheeled overhead as a sleek Targaryen ship glided into the sheltered harbor below Storm's End's mighty cliffs. Gendry, Davos, and a guard of knights descended to the dock, accompanied by castle staff. They watched as the gangplank lowered. Daenerys Targaryen emerged, silver-gold hair rippling in the sea breeze. She wore a black cloak trimmed with red, the three-headed dragon sigil emblazoned on her breast. By her side walked Ser Jorah Mormont, faces stony as ever, and Missandei, a poised woman with keen eyes. Behind them, a handful of Unsullied marched in perfect sync. Gendry stepped forward, bowing his head respectfully. Your Grace, welcome to Storm's End. Daenerys studied him with an intensity that reminded him of a predator sizing up a possible ally or threat. She inclined her head in reply. Lord Gendry Baratheon, I presume. It seems you've handled yourself well against those who would disrupt the peace. I wanted to see this place for myself. I've never set foot in Storm's End before. Her eyes flicked to the looming castle walls perched high above. The fortress had withstood countless sieges through history, including the might of House Targaryen in earlier generations. Gendry offered his arm, guiding her toward the horses waiting to carry them up the winding cliff path. On the ride up, Daenerys asked pointed questions about the rebellion, Edric's fate, and the casualties. Gendry answered honestly, choosing not to hide the toll the conflict had taken. If she was impressed by his candor, she did not show it. When they arrived in Storm's End's courtyard, the staff bowed and the guards stiffened to attention. Gendry escorted Daenerys and her retinue inside, the thick stone walls echoing with each footstep. A hush seemed to fall over the fortress. Men whispered of dragons and bastards, the complicated heritage that converged under this roof. They gathered in the great hall where Daenerys accepted Gendry's hospitality graciously enough. Missandei inquired about lodgings and Davos arranged for the Queen's party to have comfortable quarters near the castle's solar. That evening, a small feast was prepared, though it was modest by royal standards. Gendry had no endless coffers of gold, nor did he believe in wasting lavish banquets while the Stormland's common folk still recovered from war. He served fish from local waters and hearty stews. Daenerys seemed to notice the simplicity, her gaze traveling over the wooden platters and earthenware cups. Yet she made no complaint, only sipping her wine in thoughtful silence. Her violet eyes lingered on Gendry as he rose to speak. "We Stormlanders extend our welcome to the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms," Gendry began, choosing his words carefully. "We have seen enough war to last a lifetime. Let us share peace if possible." Daenerys tilted her head, listening. "Peace is my aim as well, Lord Baratheon. Yet I cannot ignore that your region has endured strife under your watch. I wonder if you have the strength to keep your house united." Gendry bristled, aware that she spoke publicly, her voice carrying across the hall. "Edric Storm's rebellion is put down. I have no illusions that everything is perfect. But the Stormlands stand. My men fought for me. They believe in my cause. And I will work to rebuild what was lost." Her tone was measured. "And do you claim the Stormlands in fealty to the Iron Throne, or as an independent domain, like the North?" She raised a brow, inviting him to declare his stance. The tension in the hall grew thick. Gendry felt eyes on him from all sides. Davos watched with a subtle shake of his head as if cautioning Gendry not to provoke her. But Gendry had made a vow to himself and to his people not to bend the knee blindly. He drew a breath. "I do not seek a separate kingdom, your grace, if you would rule justly. The Stormlands have long been part of the realm. But we have our pride. We will not be trampled. If you would guarantee fair governance, fair taxes, and protect the small folk, I see no reason to resist the Iron Throne. But if we find tyranny, my people know how to fight for their freedom." A guarded hush followed his words. Daenerys tapped a finger on the table's surface, the faintest smile curling her lips. "I have no wish to trample the Stormlands. I've spent much of my life freeing the oppressed across the sea. Tyranny is what I despise. But I also will not suffer disloyalty. If you call yourself Lord of Storm's End, I expect you to uphold the laws of the realm, to pay tribute to the crown, and to defend it against any threat. Can you swear to that?" Gendry met her gaze. He thought of how Robert had rebelled against the Targaryens, how Stannis had defied Joffrey, how the entire Baratheon line seemed forged from storms and rebellion. Yet the realm might truly need unification after so many wars. "If you uphold your word," he said, "you shall have my loyalty in turn." A flicker of understanding passed between them. Daenerys looked to her advisors. Ser Jorah gave a subtle nod. Missandei's expression remained carefully neutral. At length, the queen relaxed slightly as though some tension had eased from her spine. "Then let this be the start of something better." They finished the meal in a calmer atmosphere, though caution still lingered beneath the surface. Daenerys inquired about the condition of the region, and Gendry explained the devastation left by Edric's raids, the repairs yet to be done. She listened, lips pressed tight, and offered to send some resources, grain from the Reach, perhaps a small loan of coin to rebuild. It was a gesture that might earn goodwill from the Stormlanders, yet Gendry remained wary of accepting gifts that came with hidden strings. Still, the queen seemed genuine in wanting to heal the realm, and he found himself letting some measure of trust settle in, if only a little. That night, as Gendry was about to retire, he found Daenerys herself waiting for him outside the great hall, a single torch lighting her face. The rest of her retinue had gone to their chambers. He paused, uncertain of her intent. "Your Grace." She motioned for him to walk with her out into the courtyard where the night air whispered through the battlements. Stars speckled the sky above, reflected in distant waves. Daenerys spoke quietly in a tone stripped of the formality she wore at the feast. "My father was the Mad King, but he sat on the Iron Throne before Robert Baratheon took it by force. Robert's rebellion shaped your father's life and destroyed mine. My brother and I fled. I became the mother of dragons across the sea. I returned home to break the wheel, or so I said. Yet how many lives have been broken in the meantime?" Gendry listened, sensing the vulnerability beneath her words. "The realm has spilled blood for decades," he replied. "Some of it in your name, some of it in the name of other kings and queens. People like me and Edric bastards were caught in the crossfire. The question is, how do we change that?" She nodded, gaze drifting upward. "Perhaps we can't. Perhaps we only lessen the damage. But if I can do anything to mend what was torn apart by my father, by the Lannisters, by all those who used power for cruelty, I will try. That's why I came here in person, to see if you and I might find common cause." He met her eyes, seeing something earnest there. "We can try." They stood for a moment in companionable silence. The faint sound of waves lapping the cliff base rose in the distance. Gendry thought of how small each human story was in the face of the vast sea and the endless sky. Yet here they stood, two figures shaped by the tides of war, trying to guide the realm to a safer shore. In the weeks that followed, Daenerys remained at Storm's End. She toured the region, speaking to local lords and seeing the scars left by Edric's uprising. Her presence awed peasants who had never seen a queen in the flesh, much less one rumored to ride dragons. Though she had left her dragons behind in King's Landing, the idea of their power loomed large in everyone's imagination. Gendry accompanied her on some of these tours, showing her the farmland near Parchments, where Edric's men had first attacked, and the small holdfasts ravaged by brigands. She saw how Gendry interacted with the small folk, how he carried himself with the unpretentious stride of a commoner, how he listened more than he spoke. She seemed to approve, or at least found it interesting. One afternoon, they stood atop a rolling hill overlooking fields that had once been Edric's staging ground. Davos was with them, offering occasional comments, and so was Arya, silent and watchful. Daenerys remarked, "You have the loyalty of these people. They speak of you as a blacksmith who understands their labor, not as a distant lord who demands too many taxes." Gendry shrugged. "I know what it's like to go hungry, to wear ragged clothes. Nobles who've never known hardship can forget how easy it is for the poor to suffer." She studied his profile. Such empathy is rare in those who rule. He looked away, feeling a swirl of conflicting thoughts. If Daenerys hoped to keep him close as a loyal vassal, was it because of his empathy, or because she recognized the threat a Baratheon could pose if turned hostile? He reminded himself that politics was rarely simple, and alliances were woven from both trust and calculation. Meanwhile, word spread that Daenerys' presence in Storm's End signaled a strong bond forming between the crown and House Baratheon. Some lords in the Reach expressed approval, hoping for stability to return to their farmlands. Others, especially those still loyal to the memory of the Lannisters, grumbled that Gendry was selling out to the Targaryen queen. Gendry paid such gossip little heed, focusing on rebuilding. Under the queen's watchful eye, masons and carpenters repaired roadways and village walls. Her men brought in small shipments of grain, enough to help feed the peasants who had lost their harvests. For the first time in a long while, hope stirred in the Stormlands like a fresh breeze before dawn. All the while, Edric remained imprisoned in Storm's End's dungeon. Gendry visited him twice, but Edric refused to speak more than a handful of bitter words. The young man's bandaged hand shook whenever he tried to lift it, the damage from Gendry's hammer strike leaving permanent stiffness. Each time Gendry descended into that dimly lit cell, a wave of remorse and anger mingled in his chest. Perhaps if someone had guided Edric more gently years ago, taught him to harness his Baratheon blood for the good of others, none of this would have happened. But it was too late for such regrets. At last, Gendry arranged a tribunal. Though Daenerys was the reigning queen, Gendry sought to conduct the matter with local Stormlander lords presiding to ensure fairness and keep the queen's presence from overshadowing everything. Still, Daenerys sat in a place of honor, her face expressionless, a silent witness to the proceedings. Arya lingered near the back, her wolfish gaze never leaving Edric. Davos stood by Gendry's side, offering counsel. The great hall was crowded with onlookers, knights, small folk representatives, and even a few visiting lords from the Reach and Dorne who had arrived out of curiosity. Edric was leaden, chained at the wrists. He moved stiffly, exhausted by weeks in a cell. Murmurs rippled through the audience at the sight of him, once a bold rebel, now reduced to shackles. The lords overseeing the tribunal read out the charges: treason, murder, banditry, terrorizing the populace, and so forth. Several witnesses stepped forward to recount Edric's raids, the burned villages, the forced conscriptions. Others testified that Edric had never personally slaughtered villagers, that some of the atrocities were committed by rogue elements under his name. But the mere fact that he had led them made him accountable. Edric's defense was brief and bitter. He admitted seeking to claim Storm's End but insisted that he tried to keep his men under control. He placed the blame for the rebellion on Gendry's unlawful occupation of the seat. One of the presiding lords dismissed that argument out of hand, pointing out that Robert Baratheon's bastards had no inherent right to claim anything unless bestowed by royal decree or local acknowledgement. Edric's supporters, fewer now than at the start, muttered among themselves. When the time came to pronounce judgment, all eyes turned to Gendry, though officially it was the tribunal's decision. The lead Stormlander lord stood, robes swaying. The crimes are grave, and the penalty for treason is death. Yet we are aware that Lord Baratheon has shown mercy thus far, and that the Queen has expressed a desire to mend old wounds. Does the Queen wish to speak? Daenerys's voice cut the hush. I have no personal vendetta against Edric Storm. However, I cannot allow a precedent of rebellion to stand unpunished. If Lord Gendry Baratheon recommends clemency, I will not gainsay him, but we must consider what message that sends. All eyes pivoted to Gendry. He rose slowly, feeling the weight of 1,000 stares. He remembered Edric's face when he was cornered in Glenmore, the desperation and anguish. He remembered the corpses of innocents, the blackened skeletons of burned homes. He closed his eyes briefly, wrestling with the tumult inside. Then, in a steady voice, he addressed the tribunal. Edric Storm is guilty of treason and murder, but he was led astray by ambition and the false counsel of men who sought to use him. His men committed horrors in his name, but we can't ignore his direct responsibility. A lord who fails to control his banners is as guilty as the men who swing the sword. The law is clear that the penalty is death. A collective breath seemed to be held across the hall. Gendry paused, then continued, but I will not demand his head. Too many Baratheons have died at each other's hands. If the tribunal sees fit, let Edric spend the rest of his days at the wall, serving the Night's Watch. The watch may be depleted, but it can still benefit from able-bodied men. He will live with the burden of his crimes in the cold and darkness, atoning by protecting the realm from threats beyond the wall. That is my recommendation. A moment of stunned quiet. Edric's eyes flicked to Gendry, and for the first time, something akin to relief or gratitude crossed his features. It vanished quickly, replaced by sullen resignation. The tribunal conferred in hushed tones. Then the lead lord pronounced, very well. Edric Storm, you are stripped of all claims and titles. You shall be sent north to serve in the Night's Watch until the end of your days. May the gods judge your soul. Edric bowed his head, chains rattling. A few onlookers grumbled, presumably wishing to see a swift execution. But the decision stood. Daenerys gave a measured nod, seemingly satisfied that Gendry had balanced justice and mercy. The hall gradually emptied, leaving Gendry feeling drained yet oddly unburdened. The cycle of Baratheon bloodshed would not claim another life that day. 2 nights later, under a pale moon, Edric was escorted from Storm's End to begin the long journey north. A small group of sworn guards accompanied him, ensuring he could not escape. Gendry stood on the curtain wall, watching the party depart by torchlight. A swirl of conflicting emotions rose in him, relief, pity, sadness for the brother he hardly knew. Arya joined him on the battlement, silent as a cat. She said nothing, only placed a hand on his shoulder. He covered it with his own, grateful for her presence. Daenerys departed Storm's End a few days later. She left with far greater pomp than she arrived, offering a formal farewell in the courtyard. Before boarding her ship, she turned to Gendry. I shall return to King's Landing to tend the capital. But know that I see you as a friend, Lord Baratheon. I hope we can rely on each other for the realm's good. He bowed his head. If ever the realm needs the Stormlands, we'll be there, so long as the crown respects our people. She offered a small, genuine smile. Fair enough. Farewell, Gendry Baratheon. Then she boarded, her retinue in tow, the Targaryen sails billowing as they set out across the sea. Gendry stood on the quay, watching until the ship was a speck on the horizon. He felt the swirl of destiny in his chest, as though a door had opened on a future he couldn't yet see. In the weeks and months that followed, the Stormlands slowly healed. Farms were replanted, roads cleared of debris, and trade routes reopened. Gendry spent more time in the forge than he did at feasts, forging not only new weapons but plowshares and horseshoes. The local folk spoke of him with a mixture of awe and affection, the blacksmith lord who had cast out the brigands and shown mercy to his own kin. Taxes remained modest, and repair crews worked tirelessly to rebuild hamlets. Davos oversaw much of the administrative detail, ensuring resources were allocated where needed most. Arya remained for a time, lingering in Storm's End as though uncertain where her path led next. She and Gendry spent stolen moments walking the ramparts at dusk, exchanging stories of the journeys that had shaped them. A quiet understanding grew between them, though neither fully knew what to call it. Lords from neighboring regions visited, curious to see how this new Baratheon would govern. Some sought alliances, offering marriage proposals to further bind House Baratheon with other powerful families. Gendry politely deflected such offers, unsure of his heart and unwilling to be used as a pawn. A hush of relief spread when no new rebellions stirred. Edric was gone, his supporters dispersed or subdued, and the Targaryen queen seemed content to let Storm's End manage its own affairs as long as it remained loyal in name. Still, Gendry knew the realm's peace hung by a delicate thread. Euron Greyjoy still lurked somewhere at sea, and pockets of Lannister loyalists nursed grudges. The North had grown ever more distant under Sansa Stark's calm stewardship, refusing to be drawn into southern politics. The Vale sat watchful behind its mountains. But for the first time in a long while, no armies clashed in open conflict. One crisp morning, Gendry rose early. He descended to the forge, lit the coals, and set a blank of metal to heat. Sparks danced as he hammered it. For hours, he worked in solitude, forging and shaping, lost in the familiar rhythm. When at last the piece was done, he quenched it in oil, wiped it clean, and inspected his handiwork. It was a simple circlet of steel, polished to a soft sheen, bearing the stag sigil etched in faint lines. Not a crown, nor was it meant to be. Merely a symbol of house and duty. He pressed his lips into a thin smile, reflecting on the journey that had brought him from Flea Bottom to this moment. He made his way out of the forge, circlet in hand, and ascended the steps to the highest parapet of Storm's End. The wind off the sea whipped at his hair, stinging his eyes with salt spray. He placed the circlet on the weathered stones, letting the sun glint off its etched surface. Then he gazed out at the horizon. Clouds gathered to the east, heralding another storm, but the fortress stood as it always had, unyielding, a bulwark against fury. He thought of Robert's rebellion, of Stannis's grim resolve, of Renly's charm, of the swirling chaos that had befallen the Baratheon line. And he thought of himself, Gendry Waters, the unwanted bastard who had become Gendry Baratheon, lord of this ancient seat. He picked up the circlet and turned it in his hands. He did not place it on his head. Crowns or circlets carried a heavy burden, and he had learned that true authority came not from metal upon the brow but from the hearts of those who followed. He would walk the path of leadership with humility, a blacksmith's son forging a legacy anew. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Gendry stood there, wind tugging at his cloak, steel circlet in his hands. A swirl of gratitude, determination, and solemn acceptance filled his chest. The storms would come as they always did, but Storm's End would endure, and so would he. In that moment, he allowed himself a rare, unguarded smile, quietly proud of what he had become. The wind howled around the ancient battlements, and Gendry Baratheon welcomed the roar of the sky, knowing that in the tumult of thunder and salt and wind, he had found his rightful place at last.